Welcome everyone, this is Andres Restart, and today I would like to talk about how I'm thinking that the Legend of Zelda team is going to really need to step it up with their next mainline open world, open air entry. And so we're crystal clear here. I don't want this video to come off as me saying that, man, they really disappointed with Tears of the Kingdom. Because of course, there's always Zelda fans that are disappointed with every sort of Zelda entry, and maybe you're not a fan of Tears of the Kingdom, but I am a fan of Tears of the Kingdom. I love Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm currently starting my second playthrough of the game, and I think it's fantastic. I think with my second playthrough, I'm coming to enjoy the game even more so. But as amazing as I think Tears of the Kingdom is, I still look at the overall situation that is Tears of the Kingdom, and then I take a look at other current modern games, and I'm left with the feeling that, man, when this next Zelda game comes around, we're going to need a really big jump here. They're going to need to really push things to another level. And I think they will. And so I would like to talk more about that today. But before going forward, let me point out that we are aiming for a goal of 40,000 subscribers. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So I remember back in 2011 when The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword came out. I loved the game, it was amazing. But there was a sentiment back then that the Zelda team had lost a bit of their touch. And I didn't necessarily agree with that point, but there was another game that came out around that time that was also a fantasy medieval adventure that became a huge hit. And that was Skyrim. And so there were a lot of comparisons between Skyrim and Skyward Sword. I think the titles themselves already sort of lean in that direction, but I think what happened during that time is a big reason why we have Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom now. Skyrim was an open world game with tons to do. Skyward Sword was a very linear game with certainly a healthy amount of things to do, but it was highly structured and you went in one direction and that was pretty much it. So there was quite a contrast between the games. And the Zelda team took note. And now we have Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where you can do so many things out of order in so many different ways. And we'll speak more on that in a moment, but I think there was something else to the contrast between Skyward Sword and Skyrim. Because Nintendo had wanted to do open world in the past before Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but the technology did not permit. They couldn't get it done in the way they wanted with the Nintendo Wii. And an issue with the Nintendo Wii back then, especially in 2011, when the Wii was already effectively a dead console, was that it was extremely dated hardware. The kind of games that were possible on Nintendo Wii just weren't even remotely close to modern games. And so you take a look at some of the modern games of today, like Elden Ring. I've been enjoying Elden Ring finally as of late, and then the DLC's on the way. Or the recently released Dragon's Dogma 2. Or there's this other game that's happening later this year. We'll see if it actually pans out to being a good game, but Chrono Odyssey. I'm looking at all these different open world fantasy medieval games. A lot of them seem to take a lot of inspiration from the Soulsborne series. Elden Ring is of the Soulsborne series. But what we're seeing amongst all of these games is these massive, beautiful open worlds with tons of things you can do, very similar to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but from a technology perspective, they certainly stand out a lot more. But also specifically with the games I mentioned, there is also a bigger emphasis on combat and boss fights. And when I think about what these games are able to accomplish and what the Zelda team is certainly capable of, I get myself wondering about what could be in the future. I still think about that tech demo that came out back in 2011, the release year for Skyward Sword, that was meant to showcase the capabilities of the Wii U. I still think it looks impressive, the way they showed off this beautiful environment with Link fighting a massive boss enemy. The way the combat looked there, it looked really interesting. It looked like something similar to some of the games I'm referencing in this video. Now, combat itself isn't the be-all end-all. This is not about combat necessarily. I'm just using it to illustrate my point somewhat here. It's more so just about how Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild were made for the Nintendo Switch or the Wii U, which are extremely dated hardware, especially in the case of Tears of the Kingdom. The game came out last year, and while there are some amazing things that are going on with this game that I definitely want to get into, it's also clear that it's running on weak hardware. There are frame rate issues. I've spoken to people that are more accustomed to playing games on more powerful systems or better hardware like PC, and the lack of 60 FPS is an issue for some, which isn't at all a reasonable expectation for the Nintendo Switch, but maybe that's part of the problem. Earlier this month, we enjoyed the 7-year anniversary for Nintendo Switch and Breath of the Wild. We're in the 8th year. It's been around for a long time. And I feel I should also add that the Switch is a handheld. So from a fidelity perspective, obviously it's going to pale in comparison to, say, for example, a PlayStation 5 that can play games like Elden Ring, like Dragon's Dogma 2, like Chrono Odyssey. So I'm not going to sit here and say, man, Nintendo really should have found a way to get Tears of the Kingdom to run at 60 frames per second. No, it just isn't possible. But for the next system, I think it absolutely is. We've heard of this Breath of the Wild tech demo at Gamescom that was supposedly meant to showcase what the Switch 2 could hypothetically do, and apparently the game was running in 4K at 60 frames per second with negligible loading times. They were not noticeable. And so all those things together sound really impressive. And perhaps that's a suggestion of what we could expect for next-gen Zelda on Nintendo's new console. And no, that's not me saying that I expect the next Zelda game to run at 4K 60 FPS with no loading times, because that's what they were able to accomplish, hypothetically, with Breath of the Wild, an older game. A newer game that has more things going on, maybe they won't be able to hit 4K, but perhaps this idea of 60 FPS may be more feasible. But this goes beyond graphics and performance. Tears of the Kingdom took a really long time to come out. We waited over 6 years to get a direct sequel taking place in the same world. Typically, direct sequels, especially when they take place in the same world, come out much quicker. This time, that didn't happen. And why is that exactly? Well, Nintendo hasn't answered exactly why we have had to wait this long. But there are a number of things that we know lengthened development. The pandemic certainly impacted things. But even going beyond that, what we've recently gotten more info on is Nintendo's overall direction with Tears of the Kingdom throughout development. And that was building on this concept of multiplicative gameplay. And when they got into Tears of the Kingdom, while Breath of the Wild was already a heavy physics-based game, they went even deeper in this direction. They focused on making everything physics-driven. All the objects, everything you can interact with in the world, even the audio is physics-driven. Each object in the world reacts differently depending on the circumstance. And so when you layer all these different things that react differently depending on the circumstance, you get multiplicative gameplay, where more and more things can happen that you wouldn't expect. And so this is a very interesting concept because it creates an environment where you can see a lot of unique gameplay scenarios. And it's also part of why I'm starting to appreciate it on a deeper level with my second playthrough. But in order for Nintendo to accomplish this, they had to put in a great deal of work. The Zelda team has been hard at work this entire time, building something that's just mind-blowing when you really put it into perspective. But as a result, at a surface level, a level that many people may not get past in terms of appreciation of what was accomplished here, the game seems lacking compared to a lot of modern games. As I discussed earlier when we were talking about just overall visual fidelity and what you can accomplish in terms of what you can see and also performance in terms of frame rate. And so with all this in mind, and with the significant leap in hardware we're going to get with Switch 2, I do think the Zelda team is going to really step things up with the next mainline open-air entry, and I think they need to. Tears of the Kingdom in some ways, because it's still on the Switch, does show its age. But imagine when the Zelda team takes this multiplicative gameplay, this heavily physics-based world, and continues to build on top of it with the next Zelda game on far superior hardware. Let's remind ourselves that while Breath of the Wild was a launch title for the Nintendo Switch, it was also made for the Nintendo Wii U. And these consoles, in terms of overall power, are actually quite comparable. The Switch is better overall, but it's not a super substantial increase. It's not a full next generation leap. The fact that it's all done as a handheld is, but in terms of what we see on screen, no. This next jump for Nintendo is going to be extremely substantial for us hardcore Nintendo fans. The Wii U came out in 2012. It is 2024. It's been well over a decade. So the kind of technology that the Zelda team is going to be working with, on top of what they accomplished with the physics engine and the multiplicative gameplay with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that together, I think they're going to be able to realize something that's going to be on a whole other level. It's not just about how pretty it's going to look. It's not just how smoothly it's going to flow with the frame rate and the seamless loading, but also how they're going to be able to build even further on top of this incredible dynamic gameplay. What else might they be able to introduce into the world? For example, in the lead up to Tears of the Kingdom, there was a lot of theories and speculation that maybe there could be some really cool time travel gameplay opportunities, and there were with Recall in terms of reversing the time of a specific object, which does relate to this insane multiplicative gameplay. But imagine a future Zelda game where you could play through the entire game world, but then also be able to go back in time seamlessly to that same game world, but a few hundred years into the past, or a few hundred years into the future, like a constant, seamless time shift stone. Newer hardware would make this possible, especially if these rumors are true of the console having very fast loading, which doesn't seem like too much of a stretch given what all the other consoles are doing nowadays. And when this game comes around, well, obviously hype levels are going to be very high, and with good reason, I think. So those may be high expectations of the Zelda team, but I also think the Zelda team is the best development team in the world, and I think they're certainly up to the task. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andre's Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.